Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that for updates on the show, be sure to follow me on Twitter at OmerQ _. Again, that's at OMERQ _. And if you like the show, please consider supporting it by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or following the show on Spotify so that you get notified when a new episode is released. Also, be sure to send it to your friends. We don't ask you to give us money, just support the show by helping it grow. Just a few easy clicks. That's all it takes. It doesn't cost you a dime, and you can do it in no time. So please consider doing that, and let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Omer 2020. Today, I'm going to be covering the COVID outbreak in the White House and how it might impact the election. Joining me to do that, back by popular demand, are Ben Greenberger and Sasha Frank-Stempel. Guys, how you doing?
I mean, it's late at night. I'm a little loopy. But other than that, we're doing great. This is going to be entertaining. You guys are going to love this.
I'd have to agree with Ben. Been a long day of classes, meetings, and stuff, but I'm ready to go. Lots of news to cover.
And let's start covering that news. Let's briefly talk about what you guys previewed with me last week, which was the presidential debate. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because I already went over it on my last episode and how disgusted I was with everyone who was involved in that debate. But just briefly tell me how you guys reacted to the debate as it was happening and the fallout from it.
Quick summary on my part. When it was 9:30 at night, I looked at the clock, saw it was 9:30, and then realized we had another hour, and I was not looking forward to that next hour. And let's just say, to quote Smokey Robinson, I was drinking that wine a little bit that night. So it was a mess of a night. I did not enjoy watching it, and I would be very, very okay if we just didn't do the next two.
I'd say I kind of agree. It was hard to watch, especially just because it was hard to listen and understand what each one was saying, given that they were all interrupting each other constantly every single second of the debate. But I really don't think many people got much out of the debate. To be honest, there were some attacks, most of them not really rooted in policy, a lot of ad hominem attacks, that sort of thing. So I just think that they're going to try to have further debates, but I don't really know how much we're going to get out of them, even if the commission for presidential debates kind of changes the rules so that it's a bit more constructive rather than just attacks on one another.
Yeah, and to your point of nobody really got anything out of it, the polls after the debates were pretty much the same. Biden won the debate according to the same margin of people that say he's the better candidate to lead the country right now. Like, we learned nothing because nothing could be learned because there was just so much noise. And Chris Wallace, bless his heart, I don't know what else he could have done. There was nothing else he could have done better. He did his best.
Yeah, he did his best, but I mean, look, I understand why everyone wants to give him pass, and to an extent I do, but I just think that there were definitely ways he could have. If you know that President Trump, who was going to erupt anyway, he did it in the last set of debates, he did it throughout the Republican primary in 2016, he's that kind of candidate, he's that kind of guy. That's what he does. And Chris Wallace should have prepared accordingly. The problem is, I think he went into it thinking that Trump was going to be presidential when everyone and their mother could tell you that he wasn't. And that's why I think you saw Chris Wallace at points struggling to maintain order. And that's also why I think you saw Biden to an extent looking lost. Because look, I'm not going to focus on Trump. We all know it was a disaster and what he did was disgraceful. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone in that situation, Biden, Trump, or Wallace, came out looking good. I think everyone pretty much came out looking flat, or in Trump's case, looking embarrassing. Biden's case also looking quite embarrassing because he offered a very weak rebuke of Trump's 4 years in office. I think if you put almost any other Democrat on that stage, they would have offered at least some critiques in the 5 minutes that they got to speak in that debate without an interruption, right? But as you said, Ben, polling indicates that nothing's changed. I think the only big change we have from the debate from last week is that Biden is up about 2 points in Pennsylvania, and he's up about 3 points overall in the national picture. Now, again, take those with a grain of salt. The entire time going into the debate, what we were saying was if Trump comes in and he finds a way to kind of make up that ground, or if he finds a way to kind of catch up to Biden in these polls or in the race, then that's an indication that he won. And for Biden, it was if he maintains where he's at, he's fine. And I think you saw this. The strategy that Trump employed in the debate, which was attack, 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 it didn't work. It fell flat, and there was no change. And Trump needed to make up some ground. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from the debate. Again, embarrassing, but all the signs point to Biden coming out the default victor.
Yeah, and I mean that's like a good point to bring up. Like I was having a discussion in one of my classes, and the question was asked, was Trump effective in interrupting? And we know he interrupted mostly because Biden has a stutter, and you can throw somebody off who has a stutter by just interrupting them because their brain is moving faster than their mouth is, and it just tangles a stutterer up if you interrupt them a lot. And my response to was it an effective strategy was no. Was he successful at it? Yeah, he did it. It worked, but I don't think people liked it. So like as a strategy, did it work? No, because people watched that and were like, this came off as rude. And I hated watching that. And to just take a sports pundit analogy, Biden didn't win the debate. Trump lost it. How's that? We'll go with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's basically what happened.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Not that anyone came out the winner, but in terms of his plan, Trump just trying to bury Biden with accusations of stuff with like Hunter Biden, that Biden's just not smart, that sort of thing. I feel like those didn't really stick, but Trump did do a good job of just kind of taking control. And that's kind of where he shined, and where Chris Wallace was just kind of trying to make up for that and trying to gain control. But Trump kind of took control from the beginning, and he just set the tone. So Biden was just kind of playing catch up almost.
So let's move on and talk about the main topic of today's show, which is the COVID outbreak within the ranks of the White House and the Republican Party. Now, on Thursday, October 1st, senior Trump advisor Hope Hicks tested positive for COVID-19, and on the same night, President Trump announced on Twitter that both he and First Lady Melania Trump had tested positive. So what was your guys' initial reaction to the news of both President Trump and Melania Trump testing positive for COVID-19?
I had fallen asleep before the news came out, so I woke up to about 1,000 news notifications and texts from friends about it. And my first thought was, wow, it finally happened. Not that that's necessarily, not saying I wish COVID on him. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that given Trump's attitude towards masks, towards social distancing, hosting rallies indoors, I was just kind of surprised that it had taken this long, because just his approach to the pandemic, to say it's not a big deal, hosting events like in the Rose Garden with a bunch of people, no mask, that sort of thing. We saw the president of Notre Dame getting it, plenty of other people from the event. So it didn't really surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go along with what Sasha's saying, where it's like, wow, it took this long. Like, I was kind of surprised that it took up until October, when he's still been holding rallies and, just having everything done like it was a normal world. I mean, when the news first broke, I was kind of like, wow, this is a wild, wild moment in our history. And then literally the next day on Friday, you hear he's going to the hospital, which it went from kind of being like, oh, people were kind of joking about it, like, oh, the president's he's got the Rona, it's all fun and games and everything. And then the next day you kind of have that moment where you're just thrown back into reality, where it's like the president of the United States is going to the hospital and we don't know what comes next. Like, that's a scary spot to be in, honestly. Like, whether you like him or not, this is the person who's in charge of the country. You could argue about how stable he is as a leader, but having a leader in a democratic society means stability, and that person is there legitimately. And then, what comes next if he's not there anymore? It's a weird moment that I don't think we've dealt with, or nobody that's alive today has dealt with ever since Kennedy. Every president's kind of just lived, right? Like that's what happens. So it was a weird moment, but it's I guess it's just a product of the world we live in today, and it's what happens when the White House doesn't take a pandemic seriously.
I think this could have been an opportunity for Trump to change his tone on COVID, since that is kind of what's been dragging him in the polls. If he were able to take a more somber approach, say he was humbled by it. He had been a bit more cavalier, but he sees that the pandemic is a real thing. It affects everyone, even if you have all the precautions that he does, such as rapid testing, that sort of thing, and control of who's around him. But instead, he is just saying, don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life. He's been photographed without his mask, just like hours after leaving the hospital. I think he's saying that it's not a big deal. I was able to survive, even though, as we've seen, he had teams of doctors, the best medical attention in the country. And using that as an example to say everyone can get past it, it affects virtually no one. I think that's a big mistake, and I think that's going to hurt him.
Yeah, and I hate to be this kind of person, because I've for so long critiqued or just gotten flat out mad at journalists who try to diagnose Trump's strokes or mental disorder. People do that all the time on Twitter, where they're like, he obviously has had a major stroke and that's why his left arm twitches when he talks. It's the most ridiculous stuff.
People do it on CNN too.
But to the effect that they've been doing it before was, it was a bit ridiculous and sensationalist. But now it's sort of like, I don't know what else we have. He got back to the White House tonight. No, not to brag, but I watched his helicopter fly past my building tonight. No big deal. And he gets back to the White House, steps out of Marine One, and he's clearly not healthy. Like, this is a man who's clearly still very sick. He's standing up on top of the balcony on the South Lawn, breathing very heavily. And he's a man who typically breathes heavily. You hear him sniffling on TV, but he was breathing heavily, stifling coughs. I mean, it was very clear that the video was showing that this is a guy who's not healthy right now. And the reason that he went back to the White House is only to project strength rather than actually get discharged from the hospital. It's bad that we can't trust what his doctors are saying right now. This is the person who's in charge of the country, and you'd think that we would be entitled to know, or he would trust us with his medical state or how he's doing health-wise. But they're very clearly covering something up, and it's just not a comfortable feeling. I'm not reassured as an American citizen right now.
What's interesting to me is how quickly this whole situation went from irony to being very sobering. Obviously you guys pointed out how Trump went to the hospital. He was, it's not out of the realm of reality that Trump would go to the hospital, because he's a person in his mid-70s. He's been known to not be the most healthy person, and we've had other leaders like Boris Johnson, who's, a similar age, similar situation, and he was in the ICU for a few days in Britain. So, it's not, so that kind of stuff, I understand people's concern and why you bring it up. It's important to bring it up because it's the president of the United States. A lot of people want to point to the fact that, he wasn't wearing his mask and all of that kind of stuff. And what else do we expect from President Trump at this point? This is a man who refused to wear a mask in a global pandemic 3-4 months when we first saw him wearing a mask in public. Other than that, he was out in public. He was meeting people. He was doing whatever he wanted because he didn't want to project weakness. He wanted to project strength, like you said. And it's just the entire situation, and we're going to talk about how, this kind of affects the White House moving forward, because now almost everyone in senior leadership in the White House has in some way tested positive for COVID-19. But the whole situation just seems to me I just don't think the American people or want to hear about it and they want to deal with it, because the debate was, what, 6 days ago? I was talking to you guys about this beforehand. The debate was 6 days ago. How long ago does it actually feel like the debate was to you guys? Because at this point, it seems like it was a century ago. There's been so much news. And it's just another thing about this White House. Just so much news in the matter of days. It just feels like years. And it feels like you're getting old just trying to keep up with it. And the 24-hour news cycle, for Trump, it was very good because it kind of distracted from a lot of his scandals. And it's even working now, because is anyone talking about Trump's tax returns now on CNN, Fox, anywhere? No. Is anyone talking about the debate anymore, which was just a week ago? No. They're talking about the health of the president. They're talking about COVID-19. And it's just another way that President Trump and the White House have found a way to use something to their advantage. You know, a lot of people originally, when Trump came out and said that he was positive, they thought it was, oh, he's faking it, or they thought it wasn't a real announcement. And I pushed back on that a lot when people said that, because Donald Trump, throughout his career, is someone who has always projected strength. And one of his main things, if you ask anyone who's ever worked around him, if he's sick, he never lets you know. If he never owns up to it. And he hates it when people get sick. That's a lot of billionaires, a lot of these, really ruthless businessmen.
No, I was just saying weird guys. That's a weird thing to do.
No, I know it's weird.
I don't ever want you to be sick. People are just so weird, and it's especially these motivational billionaire guys that write their books.
But it's a real thing. And Donald Trump, who's from that class of billionaires, that class of ruthless businessmen who feel like that's okay. What they do is, if they're sick, they never want to own up to it. And I think this was something where he tested positive the same day as Hope Hicks, when everyone found out. And when that happened, he probably found out and he didn't want to actually do it. But it was spun to him in a way where it was said, if you do this, if you say, hey, I tested positive, this could gain you some sympathy. And I think in a way it has, because a lot of people hate Donald Trump. He's not my cup of tea. I don't like him, obviously. But, when the president does go to the hospital, when the president is suffering from a disease, it is a sobering moment, whether you like him or not. My focus wasn't so much on Trump himself. It was focused on, okay, let's say where the worst happens, how do we move forward? How does that affect our policy, our governance moving forward? How does that affect our election that's only a month away? These are the things that, pop into your mind. A lot of people don't like to talk about it, but I think if you go to any circles of politics, even anyone at the dinner table, while that was going on, that was probably a topic of conversation, right?
They avoided a cover-up here. There was an attempted cover-up at this, and the only way that this got out was because Jennifer Jacobs at Bloomberg broke the news of Hope Hicks testing positive, which then led Trump to tweet about it. Trump had already tested positive before Hope Hicks did. Right? Trump was already sick Wednesday morning. Right. He was sick Wednesday morning. When he went on, I think, Hannity on Thursday night, he was waiting for results on a more conclusive form of a test. That's what he said.
Right.
In actuality, he had already gotten the results back, and he was most definitely positive. So he lied to the American people on Sean Hannity's show.
Right,
Fine.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
And then, you almost wonder how long could this have gone had that story about Hope Hicks not broken, right? Would they have actually tried to cover this up? There's nothing that tells me that they wouldn't have.
Yeah, I know. I think
wouldn't have.
For Trump, he definitely would have tried to cover it up, because, like I said, he's not someone who's going to admit when he's sick. I think for people in senior leadership and people around him, they probably saw it as a way to help him. That's probably how this got out and how he was convinced. Because even if he tested positive and even if it came out, I'm telling you, Donald Trump is not one of those people who's going to willingly admit it, even in a tweet, even after every single person and their mother knows that it happened. He's gonna lie. He's lied blatantly about things before. So that's the only way that I think that Trump would come out and say something like that, is if it was spun to him in a way that said, this can help your campaign, which is not doing good right now.
I'm not even sure about that though, because then how do you even justify the entire West Wing getting sick? Like everybody that works in that White House is sick right now, and like, it's I don't think anybody wants to be sick. Like I don't think that they would really want to take that bullet for the president if it were just a campaign strategy, right? Like this seems like it's just an out of control thing that
Well, no,
they couldn't take seriously.
I'm not saying it wouldn't come out eventually. I'm saying him making that announcement, because Trump wouldn't own up to it if he wasn't told in a way that it could help him. Let's just get to the entire White House getting it, okay? So far as we know, President Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, Senior Advisor Hope Hicks have tested positive, and we later found out in the days following that RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, former Governor Chris Christie, and former White House counselor Kellyanne Conway, both of whom were helping President Trump in the lead up to the debate last Tuesday, tested positive, as well as Trump campaign manager Bill Stepien. And we also had three U.S. senators, all Republicans, test positive. Those are Senators Mike Lee from Utah, Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina, who is running for re-election this cycle, as well as Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. We also found out that, I believe, earlier on Monday, that White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, who's kind of been the voice of the White House throughout this whole thing, tested positive as well. This is really a White House in disarray. This is a White House in chaos, because you have almost all of the people in senior leadership testing positive. You don't know who else might test positive in the days coming, because, Kayleigh McEnany, she's been in and around the White House, doing a lot of cleanup in the days following Trump's diagnosis. This is a real cluster for the White House, guys. What a lot of people are doing is they're kind of pinpointing this back to the Rose Garden event that happened about just over a week ago. And for those who don't know, the Rose Garden event on Friday, September 25th, Trump officially introduced Judge Amy Coney Barrett as his pick to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. And, a lot of these people were at that announcement. They were at that event in the Rose Garden, and they believe that this is how a lot of the spread happened on that day. Now, the obvious question becomes, how does this affect the actual judiciary process moving forward? Because you have Senators Mike Lee and Senators Tom Tillis who are on the Judiciary Committee, and whose votes you need if you're the Republicans to move this forward. So, guys, how does this affect the nomination process moving forward?
I think before we get into the political ramifications, just the fact that 11 people from that Rose Garden event have tested positive, and that the White House isn't performing any sort of comprehensive contact tracing seems to me a bit short-sighted. Even if you don't want the political ramifications of having all these Republican senators, members of Congress, members of interest groups, that sort of thing, you don't want them all to have to quarantine because they've been in contact with people who have COVID. This is going to affect members of Congress who have to vote on Republican priorities. So the fact that they're not taking a proactive approach to this is kind of surprising, although given that how this White House has handled COVID, not so surprising.
Yeah, I'll kind of talk a bit about the judicial committee, just because everything Sasha said is, absolutely accurate. It's just been, this is the manifestation of their policy on this. There's been no clear national policy, and when you don't have a clear national policy and you're not willing, not that it's not a clear national policy out of we're afraid of big government. It's a unclear national policy out of we don't care about this and we don't think this is an issue, right? We've seen Republican administrations, conservative administrations that are afraid of big government, but will take action when it impacts them on a personal or a White House level, right? But this is something where they very clearly do not care about public health and this entire crisis. So, this just seems to be the natural conclusion of all that. But on the Judiciary Committee side, I think they're going to figure out a way to get Barrett through one way or another. I'm not really, I'm not like, I wouldn't be surprised if Ron Johnson comes in, as he said, in a moon suit to vote. So they seem very determined, and like I think they're kind of viewing that whole Rose Garden episode as, look, if that's the price we got to pay to get Barrett through, then that's the price we got to pay, and we're willing to do it. And Mitch McConnell is absolutely hell bent on judges right now. And look, if they realize that they had a chance at 6-3, I think they're going to go to all ends of the earth to get to 6-3.
Yeah, that moon suit was not an over-exaggeration or hyperbole by you. It was an actual quote. It was actually a recommendation that was made. And I think you will see the Republicans, no matter what, try to push this forward. The question, I think, becomes, are these the only two who were affected by this? Because, we've seen in a lot of Republican circles wearing masks are not, it's not really a necessity, those events. And, the question is, how much has just the spread from the Rose Garden event actually spread to the other circles of politics in the Republican Party? And, that affects not just the Judiciary Committee. That doesn't affect just Amy Coney Barrett's nomination process. It affects, people who are running for re-election. It affects, policy making as we're trying to get something resembling a COVID-19 pandemic stimulus passed, as we're trying to get some sort of common sense legislation passed on that front. We're also dealing with this. And I think you're right, Ben. I think at the end of the day, they're going to try to push someone through. There was the idea that they're going to try to set up medical tents in the Judiciary Committee room, because the rule is they can have hearings online, but the actual vote on the nominee has to happen on the floor. You have to be present on the floor to actually give the vote. That's an important thing to note. So I think Mitch McConnell actually did suggest that they would set up something similar to medical tents, so they would be isolated and away from everybody to mitigate any spread of the virus. But the issue also becomes, you're in a room with a lot of very old men and women giving these votes, and any sort of mess up, any sort of slip could very easily infect someone else. And that's, I think, something that's lost in all of this. And I think it might, and this might actually delay it maybe by a few days. It might buy the Democrats a few days, but still it doesn't change anything, right? Because the Democrats, unfortunately, still do not have the numbers. The Democrats, even if, let's say, best case scenario for the Democrats, this is somehow pushed to after the election. And I doubt that's going to happen. But, the actual vote is pushed after the election, and they get Mark Kelly. Even if Mark Kelly is in office sworn in, it changes absolutely nothing, because the Democrats still do not have the necessary votes. And there's been a lot of talk in a lot of, Democratic and progressive circles that this might help them. It's not true. Unless somebody has a sudden change of heart, nothing is going to change on that front. And it's really sad. It's really sad given where we are and given, the lengths that people are willing to go. But that's what happens when you have corporate donors dictating our judicial process. Because this is the reason that Mitch McConnell is pushing this so hard isn't just because he wants to see a 6-3 court. It's because a lot of the Republican donors want to see a 6-3 court. A lot of Republican special interests want to see 6-3. I don't know if you guys heard, but Clarence Thomas and Judge Alito on the Supreme Court were already talking about, I believe it was the Oberfeld case, or they're trying to start the discussion on LGBTQ rights and specifically same-sex marriage. So so you're seeing a lot of these things move very fast, and like I've said on this show before, the 24-hour news cycle, a lot of it gets lost and you forget it's going on. And I think this is just becoming a lot. This is becoming way too much for the American people to follow. And the process was never supposed to be this difficult, I think. It was supposed to be a process where you trusted your politicians to make the right decisions, to make the right choices for you. That's why you have representatives representing you. But it's turned into just this mess where you have to try to hold your elected officials accountable for every single thing that they do because they can't be trusted, unfortunately. And it's really sad that we're at that point.
Well, I mean, the other reason that he's trying to ram it through right now is because I think he realizes that this is probably the only shot that he's going to get
Oh
right
yeah.
right
Oh yeah.
now. And also because it's not popular with voters, right? Nominating and pushing somebody through right now when we have an election coming up in 4 weeks. Like it's just people don't want that, and this is the little period he has where nobody can tell him anything about it.
I think we will definitely see the complications that COVID is going to bring to the confirmation hearings. Was we all can remember the clips, for example, of Kamala Harris questioning Kavanaugh, and she definitely saw a rise in her profile because of it. But that just becomes a lot harder when senators have to make the choice whether to risk being in person, getting COVID to have that more back and forth argumentative stance, or be at home in their office, or for example, in front of a Zoom call where there's that lag. There's not necessarily that sort of emphasis you can get with the in-person discussions. So I think a lot of Democrats are incredibly committed to probing Barrett's qualifications, her past stances, that sort of thing. And they're going to have to walk that line between their own safety and the safety of the American people in terms of what they believe Coney Barrett is going to overturn. Republican senators, on the other hand, seem to be taking fewer precautions, as we've seen, for example, with the Rose Garden event. Will want to be in person, I guess, just based on what they've been doing so far, just because they want that strong in-person defense of Coney Barrett to push her through.
Yeah, I think you're gonna see a lot of this develop over the next few weeks. You guys both touched on this before. How does this look for the Republicans? And by this I mean the judiciary nomination as well as the COVID outbreak within the ranks of the White House. How does that look for the Republicans going into this election?
I definitely think that they'll try to use the confirmation process to drum up support, especially among their base. People who are motivated by things like Roe v. Wade, Obergefell, as you mentioned before, just sort of pro-business, the corporate interests, as you said. I think they're going to try to use those arguments, attacks on Coney Barrett's faith in particular, as ways to drive up their base's support. And additionally, kind of the Trump appointing federal judges has been a hallmark of his administration. He's appointed a quarter of all active federal judges in the US. And so, win or lose, even if maybe the confirmation of Barrett backfires, Republicans lose the presidency, lose the Senate, Democrats keep the House, the fact that conservative judges now occupy so much of the federal judiciary, I think we're going to see that the impacts of that for decades to come. Whether or not Republicans are able to push through legislation, they have allies in the courts to overturn some Democratic initiatives and uphold Republican ones.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely going to be tough for a Democrat administration to achieve its goals, especially if they're a little bit further left than a typical Democratic administration would be. But just implications for the election based off this latest outbreak in the White House. I mean, I'm again like I'm not so sure it really changes anything. Like I think everything about this election is kind of like baked in already. Like I don't. I'm kind of skeptical right now because I would have loved to come on here with some hot take and be like, this is going to change everything and this is our October surprise. I mean, a lot of people are calling it an October surprise, but it's like, sure, you were surprised by something in October, but generally that's something that changes the polls. This doesn't really seem to have any impact. And I think it's pretty clear to people that, Trump is not doing well and like physically, like he is sick. And, this whole thing could have been avoided. And this just goes back to the theme of the virus and people don't like how he's handled it. I mean, this is just part of the entire narrative. It's just, he's the main character now. Instead of just, the narrator. And, I don't really know what else to say about it besides like, we are where we are and people are probably already starting to vote. And like, this is where we are right now, and it seems like nothing's really going to change.
That's an interesting point, which I really agree with. The fact that
Nothing's gonna
scandal after
change.
scandal, news story after news story, nothing changes. We all say, oh my God, Trump did this, Democrats did that. This should change things. How is this creating a new paradigm? It really hasn't changed. We haven't really changed from where we are several months ago, or even when Biden was nominated in the first place. It's just we've become kind of
Yeah.
stuck. And no matter what, maybe there is 3% of persuadable voters, something like that, where we're not really going to see that much of a change. And even if there are things that are unprecedented, it doesn't make much of a difference in the eyes of nearly all of the American public.
The most important factor in this election is, can Biden excite people enough to turn out for him? That's what's going to, at the end of the day, win or lose this election. Because if he can, it's in the bag. He's won. That's it. If he can't, then I think you're looking at a similar situation where in states like Michigan, states like Wisconsin, you might see that lack of enthusiasm hurt Biden, and he could lose.
See, I want to agree with that assessment because it means that Biden actually has to make people vote for him, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I think Trump's done that job for him.
You really
Right?
think so?
Like I do think so because in 2016 it was a hypothetical. This time it's real. I mean, everybody's seen what 4 years of Trump is. Now they know if they want 4 more years of it. That's really all it is.
Yeah, but have they really denounced him in that way? Because you're still seeing, even through all of this, every single thing, even through the debates, people still trust Trump on the main issue. Like you can argue coronavirus has become a larger issue, but on the economy, for some reason, people still trust Trump more than they trust Biden. And it's something that, I shine a light on, not to, I shine a light on it because it is important. It's something that does, in a way, impact election and dictate where elections are leading to, even if it's not already clear by the Electoral College and the polls leading up to it. When I say excite voters is the most exciting voters for Biden is the most important factor in this election, I say it because of the fact that you have a lot of voters who are voting third party. You have a lot of progressives who are not necessarily happy with the choice of Biden. You have a lot of progressive in states like Michigan who are not excited by a Joe Biden presidency. Let's move on to the vice presidential debate. So the vice presidential debate is going to be hosted in Salt Lake City on Wednesday, October 7th at 9 p.m. You can find it on all online resources and all major networks. And this time it will have plexiglass. So, guys, what are you guys looking forward to in the vice presidential debate?
I mean, probably just having some sort of normal debate. Like this is definitely going to be a lot more substantive and informative than the first debate. I mean, I'll be totally honest. Mike Pence as a debater is a little bit boring, but he's very clear with what he's saying. And he doesn't take forever to make his points. He definitely dances around stuff when he talks, and he doesn't really answer questions. But he's a politician, and at least you can understand the point he's making, though. And with Kamala Harris, let me get that right. Kamala Harris. She's a very clear talker. She's easy to understand. She's a decent storyteller. And the way that she tells stories is she starts with where she's going to end, and then she brings you back to the beginning as if it's like some big reveal. So, I mean, the format that we're looking at is 90 minutes. It's going to be 9 10-minute segments of topics. So, I'm looking forward to just some interesting debate. And this is probably the most in-depth we're going to get on topics because Trump doesn't seem very willing to get in depth on anything, and Biden sometimes follows him down that route.
And especially compared to last time around in 2016, I really believe that the stakes are much higher for this debate. Everything's just more in the spotlight, I guess, but also just given that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are both old, at risk for COVID in these times, Trump recovering and still currently positive for COVID. I think that there are high expectations for both of them. Pence did very well last time around in the debates against Tim Kaine. Kamala, of course, had the confirmation hearings where she kind of was really had her like shining star moment, I guess you could say. So they both have high expectations with all eyes on them. I think it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna get really many insults or attacks. I mean, you're gonna get the regular. I think you're gonna get very, again, normal political attacks, if anything. Possibly going after, Mike Pence's history with LGBTQ legislation and things he said on that, maybe, or Kamala Harris's judicial record, stuff like that. I think this debate is going to possibly be the most important debate. If you're looking specifically for policy, this is definitely the most important debate, because if debate number one from the presidential candidates was any indication, then I think you're not going to get much, because neither Trump nor Biden really seemed capable of making a policy argument. I think in this debate, you're going to see that policy argument made by both sides very well. And, Kamala Harris, she wasn't really known as the best debater, I think, even in the Democratic field. She had a few very good moments in the Democratic primary. She had, obviously, the moment where she called Vice President Joe Biden out for busing. She had a few moments where she went back and forth with, I believe it was John Delaney, and poor John Delaney, R.I.P. But, she also had a few very bad moments, namely the Tulsi Gabbard moment that essentially ended her presidential campaign, right? So, Kamala Harris, I think if she's able to make the policy argument and also kind of go after Pence for his record and, tie him to the president, I think that's important, especially if you want to try to get the moderate vote. If you tie someone like Mike Pence, because Mike Pence is seen by a lot of people as Donald Trump's kind of tie to the establishment. He's kind of what, makes Trump passable for a lot of people. That's why it's going to be very important for her to kind of make that connection and make it in a very strong way. Because Pence is very good at distancing himself from the president, but also somehow at the same time attaching himself. Because when he's talking to, he's very good at reading the crowd. When he's talking to a very moderate kind of establishment, mainstream wing of the Republican Party or moderate voters, he's very good at speaking to them and kind of saying not really mentioning Trump that much. But when he's talking to his evangelical base of Trump, he's very good at riling them up as well. So I think look for Mike Pence to be very strategic in the way that he ties himself to the president, because he's going to have to. And I think it's something that Kamala Harris is going to come after him for. But all signs point that this is going to be a very substantive debate, and I think everyone should tune in on Wednesday.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there were to be a big turning point in this race where Trump could get a couple points back in the polls and make it competitive again, I think it could be this. If Mike Pence pulls a rabbit out of his hat and, by some miracle comes off as charismatic, or people really love him or something, and, the idea of, Trump not being healthy is kind of floating in people's brains a little bit. It's like, hey, maybe this guy could be the president. I'll vote for Mike Pence, right? It's a vote for Trump is a vote for Pence. That could be a turning point. Then again, Mike Pence is not a, get people excited to vote kind of guy. If he were running in the Republican primary in 2024, I don't think he'd even win. So
right. The good thing for him is that's not really his job to come off as charismatic. His job is specifically just to, because Mike Pence has this very interesting way of speaking. If you ever actually watch him speak, if you watch those 1 minute clips that you see on AJ Plus or whatever, it just comes off as very boring, and you don't even want to watch it. But if you watch his full speeches, he's got this kind of grandpa vibe about him, where he's talking extremely slowly, but he's precise in what he says. And if you watch it all together and you put it all together, even if you disagree with him, which I do 100%, but everything he says makes sense, and you can see why he kind of like draws all of the connections that he does. So he's very good at like kind of like putting that narrative together, and that's something to look out for. I think Wednesday, because Mike Pence is the only one who can actually make the policy argument for Trump, and that's something that Biden is shown to be weak on. That's something that Trump is shown to be weak on. One of these candidates has to show if like whose policy is better, and I think this is the point in time in the election to show it. This is the only time we're actually going to have their policies match up against each other, and you're going to have to see what the American people choose.
I think we'll see some of that, but at the same time, like we talked about when we were all together last time, not many people are persuaded by the presidential debate. And this is the undercard debate. So if people weren't persuaded by the months of coverage, by the handling of the COVID pandemic, by the first debate, do we really think that the second debate, the vice presidential debate, is really going to sway people when there are going to be, in theory, 2 more presidential debates afterwards? I think it'll be important, and it will be interesting to see their policy ideas put forth a little bit more rather than the substance-free first debate. But I would caution against putting so much stock in the results of this debate.
So I'll kind of agree with you and say absolutely not. I'm just really trying to find an angle here. I'm really just trying to find something, because everything's been so stagnant. And it's like, well, if there were something, I guess this is probably it. But yeah, probably not.
Hey, I mean, the sentiment from a lot of moderates and a lot of anyone who loves basic decency was that they hated the last debate. And this is actually being hyped up as probably the most important debate by a lot of the mainstream media, a lot of people, a lot of pundits on YouTube, Twitter, everywhere. They're hyping this debate up, and I think you're going to see it be one of the more important vice presidential debates, I think, in modern history. So, take it with a grain of salt, obviously. Take everything we've just said about the debate with a grain of salt. But, I don't think you should entirely be dismissive at all of the actual policy arguments that are going to be made. Because these are things that, like I said, are going to be played on clips, on both Republican and Democratic leaning posts on Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. So even if the American people aren't going to see the entire debate, they're going to be able to see whatever, AJ Plus or ProggerU puts up on their socials, right? They're going to see, whatever little policy arguments that they make and whatever little snippets that there are. Ben, what's the biggest issue for you in 2020?
Like that I will be voting on?
Yes.
The issue that I'll be voting on?
Yeah, biggest issue you'll be voting on.
If you're asking me as a person, I want sanity back in government. These past 4 years have absolutely broken my brain, and I think we have all lost sleep and hair and everything over this. We've lost our marbles over the past 4 years, and I would like to recollect my marbles and not be watching for, oh my God, what did the president do today? I just want, let's just be normal, man. Let's just be normal. I just want to be normal.
Yeah, I definitely think that easing America's collective headache from these past 4 years is definitely something to vote for. And while yes, a vote for sanity isn't necessarily the most attractive option, I think that it's necessary given that so many things like our global relationships, just our domestic policy depend on a degree of sanity and being able to work through issues rather than grandstanding. And I think that the Trump administration has just turned it up to 11 in that area.
I actually completely disagree. Sanity is sexy right now. There's nothing sexier than sanity. I want nothing more than just like a big old deep breath right now. That's all that I want.
Well, thank you guys for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I will probably have you guys on at some point in the near future. So thank you again for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, always glad to come on.
All right, and thank you guys for joining me. Be sure to tune in next time as I talk to Jamie Fortin about everything going on in 2020. Later, guys.